One of the topics that I get asked about a lot, both here and in real life, involve things like the Rake, the Wendigo, and other related legends. I can't honestly say I know a lot about any of them, but based on some of the light reading that I've done, I can say that I've heard some stories and they seem to be loosely related to them. I've heard the old adage that legends like that come from somewhere, and I'm sure that's true, but as you know, I try to take things like that with a grain of salt. I mean, you have to out here. It's sort of like working in a hospital, I'd imagine. I mean, you can spend all day thinking about how many people have died there, and how there's probably ghosts, or whatever you want to call them, all over the place, but it doesn't do you any good. It just makes it harder for you to do your job. I think a lot of us feel that way, and that's why we just try to go about our work like everything is fine. Once you get paranoid, there's not really any going back, and a lot of cadets quit because of it. My park especially seems to have a high turnover rate because of cadets graduating and getting so freaked out about everything, they can't seem to let it go. I talked to KD a bit about her experience because I wanted to know what she thought about the Wendigo, and she didn't really have anything in particular to say about it, aside that she didn't want to think about it that much. But she told me a friend of hers had something similar happen. I contacted this person, H, over Skype, and they agreed to talk to me a bit. You're aware of my work here, and they're fine with me posting the story exactly as they wrote it. I grew up in Central Oregon, and there's a conservation called Warm Springs about 2 or so hours from where I lived. I only mention that because a lot of people in my area have friends there, and of the land that's in that area, a lot of it belongs to the tribe. When I was a kid, we used to go camping up there, not on the res, obviously, but in the area, and I met a lot of the kids who grew up there. I got to know one kid really well. His name was Nolan, and we ended up hanging out a lot when our families were in the area. Our folks got to know each other, and so we'd get to keep in touch and camp out around the same time. We'd go camping for about 2 weeks, so we were out there for a long time. I asked him if he camped in an RV. Yeah, my dad had one, so I guess it wasn't really camping, but we'd take our tents and stuff and we'd set them up out far away from the camp most nights. I didn't like sleeping in there because I liked being outside. And then we talked about camping for a bit. So, anyway, sorry. One year, Nolan and I were out there. I think we must have been like 12 or so. We wanted to go out and camp near the river because we wanted to try night fishing. I think we must have been out there like a third of a mile from the main camp, far enough away that we couldn't hear or see anyone else. I remember that much at least. We were messing around with most of the day. I don't really remember much about it, but we ended up building a fire at some point. I was really impressed because he had this flint or something that he used to start it. I'd never seen anyone do that before, so I thought it was pretty cool. I got him to teach me how to do it, and we lit some more stuff on fire, which, looking back, was really stupid because it was the middle of the fucking summer. And if I remember right, the fire warning was either at yellow or orange, but thankfully we didn't start anything major. And when it got dark, we sat around and talked about whatever it is that 12-year-olds talk about. I don't really remember. What I do remember is at some point, he looked over my shoulder at the river and asked me if I could see something. The way our camp was set up, we were about 10 feet from the river, and we were at the wildest point, so it was probably about 20 feet from the other bank. It gets hot up there in the summer, and the water's still cold, which is important. I look over my shoulder, and I could see something wading in the water on the other side. From where we were, it looked like a deer, but we couldn't really tell because of the fire. I got up to look closer, and I saw a pair of antlers, so I figured it was a buck. But I thought it was weird that it was wading into the water, and it was definitely headed for us. So I asked Nolan what he thought we should do. He looked over at the fire with his weird expression, and he tells me to sit down and shut up. So I do, because I'd never seen him act that way before. He's whispering at me to ignore it and to just keep talking, like we were, but I couldn't think of anything to say. He was saying something about an episode of some show, but I could hear the deer coming through the water, so I wasn't really paying attention, and I was trying to see over his shoulder, but every time I did, he'd sort of hit me on the arm to make me look at him. I wasn't really scared, I remember. I was just sort of confused. But then I could hear the deer come out of the water, and I could kind of make out what it looked like. And I realized it wasn't a deer, because whatever it was walking on its 2 legs. I started to get up. I was super freaked out, but Nolan just yanked me back down and talked louder about the television show. I could tell he was just as scared as I was, probably even more. He leaned in and poked the fire with a stick, and he whispered that whatever I do, I can't speak to it. I could see it come closer, and it stood right behind Nolan's back. I was about ready to pee my pants, and I think I probably would have tried to run if I had been alone, but I didn't want to leave Nolan, so I kept sitting really still and sneaking glances at it. It wasn't that tall, but the way that it carried itself was just wrong. Like its center of balance was screwed up. I can't really describe it, but it was kind of like it kept shifting too far forward. It just stood there behind Nolan for a long time. And eventually, Nolan ran out of things to say, and we just kind of sat there for a second. The fire was making noise, but I thought I could hear this thing actually talking in a really low voice. I couldn't hear what it was saying, and I leaned forward a tiny little bit. I actually did pee my pants when I leaned forward, too. I couldn't see its face, but I saw its eyes. They were cloudy and milky, and if you want to know what they look like, find that one scene from The Lord of the Rings where Frodo falls into the lake and all the dead people were floating towards him. That's what the eyes look like. So all I saw were these two white eyes floating above Nolan's head, and the really vague shape of the antlers coming out of its head. I don't know what my face looked like, but at the exact same time, Nolan and I fucking booked it out of there. We ran non-stop until we were back at the main camp. My pants were soaked, so I took them off when we were running and I threw them into the bushes. We both stopped once we were in front of my dad's RV and we couldn't see anything chasing us, so we stood there and caught our breaths. I asked him what that thing was, but he said he didn't know. He said his grandpa had only warned him that if anything ever came up to him when he was out in the desert, that he was never, ever supposed to talk to it or listen to anything it had to say. I wanted to know if he'd heard it talking too, but he said that the only thing that he was able to understand was, "Help you." I think we ended up sleeping in the RV with my parents, and the next night we went back out and didn't see anything. That does remind me in a lot of ways of the Wendigo legend. There's a phrase used to describe it that I think fits this situation perfectly, which is that the Wendigo is the spirit of the lonely places. I know sometimes when I'm out in the woods, where I know that there's no one around me for miles and miles, I get this weird kind of craving that I can't really explain. I don't know if it happens to anyone else, but I know that this desire to consume infects me, and it's not like I'm craving for anything in particular, but more of this weird, distracting hunger that comes from every part of my gut. I also wanted to find out more about this Faceless man, if I was able to anyway, and I found a few more similar things. I asked around my circle of friends, and one of them said that he was out doing repairs at a park in his area, and he saw something that kind of looked like that. We were having dinner in town, 5 of us, including myself. This guy, he was repainting an information booth, heard a man ask him for directions to the nearest campsite. He didn't turn around because he was up on a ladder, but he informed the man that there weren't any campsites nearby, but that if he headed down to the road about 4 miles, he could find one at another park. He asked if he could be of any other help, but the man said no, and thanked him. My friend said that he kept painting, but he was listening, and he never heard the man leave. The second that he came up and talked to me, the hairs on my neck stood up, but I wasn't really sure why. I just had this really uneasy feeling about the whole thing, and I wanted to finish up painting and get out of there. I figured maybe part of it was that I couldn't turn around and look at him, but something just felt off. There was also this weird smell floating around, even before the guy started talking to me, kind of like old period blood. I had looked around to see what was causing it, but I couldn't find anything, so I waited for the guy to walk away. But I didn't hear him leave, which made me think that he was just standing there and watching me. So I asked again if I could do anything for him, and he didn't answer. I knew he was there, though, because I didn't hear him leave. So I did this awkward turn on the ladder and looked down to see what he was doing. Now, I admit, it could have just been my brain fucking up a bit, but I swear to you, Russ, for a split second, when I turned around, that fucker didn't have a face. Like, he had no face. It was almost concave and totally smooth. And I just about had a fucking heart attack, because I couldn't even wrap my brain around what I was seeing. I thought I started to say something, but there was this kind of pop inside of my head, and suddenly he was just a normal-looking guy. I must have looked weird because he asked me if I was okay, and I was just like, yeah, I'm fine. He asked about the campsite again, and I point him to where he has to go, and he's like, I'm not from around here. Can you help me get there? Now this is when I know something's really up, because there's no way this guy got out here and doesn't know where he is. And for that matter, there's no car around, so how else did he get here in the first place? I said I was sorry that I couldn't take him anywhere in a company vehicle, and he's all like, "Please, I really don't know where I am. Can you help me and help me get there?" So now I'm seriously weirded out, and I start wondering if this is some kind of ambush or whatever. I tell him that I'll call him a taxi to come out and take him to where he wants to go, and I pull my phone out and he goes, "No," and walks away really quickly. But he doesn't walk out of the park. He walks back into the fucking trees. I got right into my fucking truck and start to get out of there. Fuck the pain or whatever. I look into my mirror to see where he was as I was leaving, and he was standing right there at the tree line again. I don't know how he got there so fast, but this time I know the fucker doesn't have a face. He was just watching me leave right before I turned the corner. He takes a big step out into the trees and kind of dissolves, I guess. Maybe it was just so dark that he blended in, but it felt more like he just melted away. Interestingly, right after this guy finishes his story, someone else piped up with another one, but with a slightly different twist. "You know, actually, I had something sort of weird like that happen a while back. I was out doing some trail scouting, and I was out in the middle of nowhere, figuring out where we were gonna have this trail run through. I hadn't seen anyone else for probably about a good 2 hours, so I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going. I was just looking at the ground for the most part. Then out of nowhere, I crest this little hill and almost run into this guy. He was older, probably in his 60s, and I start to apologize to him for running into him. And then I notice his face, and I probably looked like a complete douchebag because I stopped and just stared at him. It took me a second to figure out what was wrong, but this guy's face was huge. I know that sounds weird, but that's the only way I can describe it. His head wasn't big or anything, it was normal, but the amount of space his face took up was way too much. Like, if you took someone's face and enlarged it by like 2 times. He doesn't say anything, he just sort of looks at me. I back up and kind of stuttering and saying that I was sorry, and I went around him and fucking got out of there and did what I needed to do. The whole time I kept looking behind me because I was so freaked out that he'd pop up behind me or something. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I swear to you, this was one of the creepiest things that I've ever seen. I switched back to the topic of the stairs a little later, and there was definite shifts in the enthusiasm. No one spoke up at first. There's this real stigma around discussing them, even when we're away from work, but I broke the ice with a story of my own. And then the guy who told me the story about the Faceless man told me this one, albeit very quietly. "A couple of years ago, I was camping with my girlfriend, and we were out and about 2 miles away from the road from the site that I know. We went to bed that night, and we couldn't sleep because..." Someone interjected a funny comment, and we were dangerously close to getting off on another subject, but I got us back on track. "Yeah, really funny, you fucker." No, it was because we kept hearing the grinding noise. My brother used to grind his teeth in his sleep, and it kind of reminded me of that. My girlfriend was really freaked out, but I just kept telling her to ignore it, because I've heard it before, and you just have to ignore it. It goes away eventually. You guys know what I mean. We all knew what he meant. So, eventually, I got her to go to sleep, but I woke up probably 2 hours later because something was just off. I rolled over and she wasn't there, and I kind of freaked out because he thought for a second, and then he took a very long drink. Anyway, I ran out of the tent calling her name, but I didn't have to go far. She was standing at the edge of the camp, looking at something in the trees. I could see her. She was really pale. The fire was low, but bright enough to see her. Anyway, so I run up to see what's going on, and she just was dead asleep, but her eyes were wide open. She has this real spaced out look on her, you know. So I put my arm around her and led her back, but she wouldn't move. She just said really quietly something like, "I have to go now, Eddie. I have to go. It's here."
I was like, "You're just sleepwalking. Come back to bed." But she just wouldn't budge. She just kept standing there and saying that she had to go. And I looked where she was looking, and there was this fucking staircase right there, about 15 yards away. A gray one, concrete. And she started to walk towards it, but I yanked her back, and that woke her up. She looked at me like I was fucking out of my mind, and she asked me what the fuck she was doing out of the tent. I didn't tell her anything. I just told her that she was sleepwalking. The grinding was gone, and she just went back to the tent with me and fell asleep again. I don't know. I don't like thinking about it, you know?
We all knew.
You guys remember that kid with him? I can't remember what it was. Some kind of brain fuck up. Not Downs, but something like it.
Someone else brought up.
Well, I got to read the report he gave when they found him a week after he went missing. It was fucked up beyond belief. I mean, you'd have to take it with a grain of salt because who knows what that kid actually thinks is real, but some of the stuff, I don't think he could have made it up.
Like what?
Well, first of all, he talked about the stairs. He said that he'd been walking with his dad, and he built a fire, and the staircase came to him, and he had to go up to them, or else something bad would happen. And the cops couldn't really understand what he was talking about after that, because he just kept saying, like, the campfire, over and over. He just kept mentioning sounds, but he couldn't say what the sounds were, just that it was loud, and that he had to cover his ears so that they couldn't hear them. But the thing I remember most is that they asked him where exactly he'd gone, but he just said that he was right there. He just kept pointing at himself, and they said that they thought that he meant that he had never left. He said that he wasn't scared because the stairs were there, and he said that they were talking to him, but not like how people talk. Like I said, it was really convoluted and hard to understand. I have a feeling that the cops didn't take most of it down. They ended up saying that the kid had some kind of amnesia or fake, and they didn't think foul play was involved. Doesn't really understand how he came back a week later, perfectly fine without a speck of dirt on him, and well fed. But hey, what the cop says goes.
There's still a lot of questions that I want to answer. I'll continue to ask around and find out whatever I can. The next update should be a lot sooner than it took for this one to come out. So thank you for being so patient, and I'll see you guys next time.